So about 2 years ago, my wife and I had just got two dogs. Buddy, a red-nosed pit, and May, a mystery concoction that resembles a shepherd of some kind. We had recently purchased and moved into our first house. I guess you could say we were living the American dream. At first everything was fairly ordinary around the new house. It wasn't too long before we got quite the surprise. My wife was pregnant. With the excitement of our first child on the way, our lives grew more distracted from our dogs. You know how when the dogs sleep, there are often times we'll wake up barking or run off to the corner of the house and start barking at an empty room? Well, our dogs did this almost as soon as we brought them home. It wasn't very often, but they would still wake up in the middle of the night on the occasion. We just ignore it most of the time and chalked up the dogs being dogs. We even got to the point that we couldn't even notice when they did it. They started doing it more often. We just thought they were having more frequent puppy dreams from the chaos of the new baby. It seemed a little different than it was at the beginning. It started around 3 months ago, when one dog woke up at 3 AM, running down the stairs to bark instantaneously at the dark corner of our living room. That first time I went downstairs as my husband's duties would state to check it out, all doors locked. Nothing out of the ordinary in the living room. I told the dogs to shut up and come back to the bed. This happened 3 more times that week, each time again at 3 AM, with nothing ever being out of place when I checked. At this point, I just assumed that they were dogs being assholes. They didn't wake up for a couple of nights after that, so I figured they were over their little game. The next week, however, they started right back up again, and again at 3 AM, and each time still with nothing wrong about our living room. After the third time that second week, it wasn't just checking on something being wrong, it was going to get the dogs from downstairs and shutting them up before they woke the baby. This being the case, my wife and I started taking turns going to get them. By the third week they were doing it every single night. One night it was my wife's turn to go get them as it was just downstairs. And as she gets downstairs, I heard her scream. So I get up and rush downstairs to see what happened. What hit me first was the smell. Like a punch to the face, I could smell pure death and decay. Like a body had been rotting in the sun for weeks on the floor of an abandoned farmhouse. In the middle of the floor was a dead black bird. How could just a bird create a foul smell? As I looked closer in the morbid scene from my living room, I saw that the inside of a bird was spread around in its body in a neatly made piles. There were maggots swarming inside the gaping hole the decayed bird was just made out of its chest. It was in a state of decay, as if they had been there for weeks, which was impossible. We were there merely hours ago watching TV before bed. I cleaned it up best as I could as my wife rounded up the dogs and went back to sleep. Next morning I went downstairs to see how bad the stain was and if we would need to replace the carpets to get rid of the smell, and it was all gone. It was as if nothing was ever there. No stain, no smell, nothing. Even the bag I had thrown it away and taken outside for the garbage was gone. It was all if it never happened. I asked my wife if I had dreamed it, but she remembered all of it as clearly as I could. She remembered all the vivid details like I did. As confused as we were about the whole thing, we just shrugged it off. We were happy not to have to replace the carpet. The next night, like clockwork, at 3 AM, the dog shot up and ran off, barking to the living room. This time both my wife and I decided to get up together to get the dogs. Just in case something strange happened again, we were both wanted to see it. As we walked down the steps, my wife walking ahead of me, the both of us struggling through the house, half awake from the sleep we had been losing from the whole ordeal, and growing more and more angry at this continuous disturbance every night. My wife leads the way as we walk down the steps towards the living room where the dogs always ran. As we neared the living room, I noticed the dogs had stopped barking and were standing side by side, hair raised, growling at the dark corner of the room. As my wife rounds the corner, she lets out a quick scream and jumps back behind me. I take a lead walking around the corner to see what she sees. A dark shadowy figure standing in the corner. It's there just long enough to notice it before it vanishes from the sight, fading into the blackness of the night. Just a flicker, a blink, and it was gone. As soon as I evaporated, the dogs were still growling, and they turned around and walked back upstairs as if nothing happened. Still standing, staring at the corner, not quite comprehending what we just seen, my wife turns on the light and just to double check, as the flick of the switch illuminates the room, the space in which the figure was standing sits a bookshelf, same as it's always been. We looked at each other blankly. "You saw that too, right?" my wife says to me. Yeah, I think so, but there's clearly nothing there now. Let's just go back to bed. Not much we can do about an empty room in the middle of the night, I replied. We go back upstairs and struggle to fall back to sleep, both still feeling uneasy from the experience. Soon enough we both did drift off and didn't wake until the following morning, to the usual alarm. A week went by without the dogs performing their newfound nightly ritual of waking at 3 AM, tearing through the house barking at some unseen entity in the living room. We felt as though it was over, and we have no more nights woken by the crazed barking ritual. But that very night, it started again, and that's when it really started to get out of hand. 3 AM once again. The time of night I'd begun to dread. It had been happening so often that I began having trouble sleeping, as my body had started to be preparing for it, waking me up 2:30 every night, anxious just waiting for it to happen again, and, like recently, gotten used to. I was awake, unable to fall back asleep, and as if the clock switched from 2:59 to 3, the dog shut up. First Body, and then May, instantly barking and taking off towards the stairway. I got up to follow, whisper shouting to them to be quiet. That night, as I rounded the corner of the living room, I could hear an odd buzzing sound, almost electric, like some sort of contraption devised by Tesla, hummed in the room. As I entered the living room, as usual, nothing but a dark room, no shadow, no dead bird, nothing but the droning hum. The buzzing was louder in this room, and then it was coming down the steps. The sound was clearly coming from this room. I noticed the wall looked odd as well, other than the sound, not sure if it was just my eyes hadn't adjusted the darkness fully yet, or what the case may be, but the walls definitely seemed darker. I flipped on the light and instantly the walls erupted with millions of flies swarming over the walls, and with the sudden addition of the lights they took a flight and burst into the black cloud, swirling around the room. The sound went from a buzz to a monolithic roar. Then seconds later they each exploded. Each one of the millions of flies took turns blowing apart as if each one of them was a tiny firecracker, and then nothing. Almost within a blink they were all gone, not somewhere else in the house, but gone, completely, vanished. Back in the normal living room again. I had no words to explain. I mean, I wasn't even sure how to say what just happened. Just then the dogs came around the corner. Apparently they had hid where the flies begun to swarm. Shake it off. No explanation. So don't worry about it. Didn't really happen. Just a product of a lack of sleep. Back to bed. For acting so tough, it was pathetic to see the dogs cover up at the sight of the bugs. And then again, we raised them to be our family, not guard dogs. The next night, again, I was prepared, already awake, almost started walking down the stairs before it could even hit 3, but for some reason, I waited till the dogs ran off. As I got down the steps, the putrid smell of the first night this had started was back. Wretched decay flooding my nostrils, nearly making me vomit. The smell so vile burned my eyes. As I stepped off, the final step of my foot hit the floor with a crutch. This was new. Every following step also crushed. The floor sounded like I was stepping over a large bug, which should have been nothing more than a soft carpet. The feel of it didn't match the sound it made either. Slippery, slimy, wet. Something oozed between my toes as I walked. The smell still so pungent, I could barely breathe. I could finally get to the living room to where I could reach the light switch. The dogs alternate between whimpering and growling at this point, seeming to just be confused as I was. I got to the light switch, flipped on, and my jaw dropped. Covering the floor walls, every conceivable surface was flesh, some rotten and some fresh, but just pieces of flesh, hands, chunks of arms and legs. It looked like hundreds of bodies had been thrown in a wood chipper and sprayed all over my house. Laying on the couch was a body, impossibly decayed and barely recognisable as human, crawling with a deep dark unknown pestilence. The blood and infectious rot gave off a smell so thick you could actually see it in the air, tiny particles visibly floating around through the air like bubbles of infectious spores. I called up my wife, wanting someone behind me to confirm what I was seeing. I could hear the footsteps of the ceiling as she made her way towards the steps, and heard her speak as she got halfway down the steps. What the hell is this smell? She got to the bottom of the steps and refused to go any further as she seen what was covering the floor, not wanting to step on it. Is that what I think it is? Do you see that? Yes. Why do I call you down here? I wanted to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Get the dogs, wash up as soon as you come upstairs. If it is like that bird, it'll be gone in the morning. You're right, I'll be up in a sec. I like to say, at this point, we had gotten rather used to creepy things happening. That and the addition of us watching nothing but scary movies all the time, we tend to brush stuff off rather easy like that. Sure enough, in the morning, the house back to normal, like it always was. I'm not sure, but the nights got more and more intense after that, more gruesome, worse smellings. It was almost like whatever it was just kept trying harder and harder to scare us, or something. We started just walking down, flipping the lights and grabbing the dogs, flipping the lights back off and heading back upstairs, barely acknowledging whatever creepy thing had been in that room. This must have made whatever was doing it mad, because things stopped going back to normal in the morning, not completely anyway. It was almost like it started over, only stronger. It started back with a bird again, like before, only it wasn't just one destroyed, but 3, gutted and blood spread out over the floor. This time, when I woke up, the blood and nostrils were gone, but the birds were not, they were just lying there on the floor. It became apparent that I couldn't ignore it anymore. I picked the birds up with a trash bag and threw them away, steamed clear the carpet where they were lying, to kind of stencilize the floor. I still had no ideas how the birds could have gotten in the house, and no way they could even have been there long enough to have decayed as much as they were. Next night I walked down the dogs, wouldn't even leave the steps. Not even growling, they looked scared. They were silent. I made it to the bottom step, and as the smell hit me, so did a whisper. Don't ignore me. Barely audible, but there. The dogs whimpered, warning and begging me not to go any further. They knew nothing good lay beyond their threshold. As I made the final step, passing the still unamusing doorway, I ignored their warning and walked into the living room. It was like walking through a gateway into hell this time. As soon as I walked through the door, the house faded away. I was surrounded by blood and black rotten puss. It wasn't my house anymore. That last step had placed me far away into another realm, one like I've never seen before. It was terrifying mix of pain and unbreathed horror. I heard screams of anguish somewhere off in the distance. As soon as they were in utter shock, I noticed I was standing in a long hall. The walls were bleeding, it was very dimly lit. I could only see 5, maybe 10 feet ahead of me, and the screams seemed to be coming from every door. I opened the first door I came to, and instantly regretted it. Inside was a woman, spread out and tied to some type of vertical table. Her screams pierced my psyche. There was another figure in there, grunsticu in every way possible. There were razor blades and nails sticking out of the flesh. His skin dripped with the black oily substance. His back was turned to me as he looked over the rusted steel table covered with surgical tools. I realized what the screams were from as I saw him grab a rusty knife and began to cut and peel away the woman's skin from her body. I immediately slammed the door shut and turned back down the hall from the direction I came. I saw no sign of how I arrived, and I couldn't even imagine how to get back out of it. The hallway behind me apparently to go on further, and I couldn't understand it because I haven't ventured that far down the hall before the first door. As I walked back from each side of the hall was aligned with the doors, each one bearing its own individual scream of pain, and the terror adding the overall agony from the air around me. It was so loud it hurt my ears, but there was no escaping it. I opened another door, hoping it would be the one to return me to reality, but as soon as I opened it, I heard the iconic laugh of a clown. The door swung open, and what I saw was the head and the torso of a clown, strapped to some sort of satanic contraption. A big red fake nose, rainbow-coloured hair, wet and matted from blood, laughing insanely as the domes what looked like some type of sadistic genetic experiment gone wrong. It looked like a failed crossbreed between a pig, a human, something directly out of the island of Dr. Mario. It strapped with the razor either face down, and what looked like a rusty sawhorse, squealing and screaming at the same time as it dripped blood. The clown torso on its contraption swung back in the fall, penetrating the creature as he yelled his crazy clown laughter. Again I slammed the door, searching for the one that would release me back to my own house. I bust into 3 more doors, each one of them more insane, and more gruesome scenes being played out. Each time catching a glimpse of something I would never be able to unsee. Things that would be burned into my mind forever, tearing out my little soul each time. The third door I opened contained a blob of a man standing alone facing the door. As I opened it, he stared in my direction. He was immense in weight and size. His eyes pure black ink, and his mouth was missing. It was nothing but fat, appearing to have skin just grown over where it should be. He groaned in pain, as he stood there with a giant hook stabbed through his flesh, attached to chains anchored to the walls. They were still holding up, of different chunks of fat exposing his naked sweat and blood-covered body, but he was covered in scars and puss-oozing sores. He stood forever, stroking himself until I burst into the room, the sight of another figure, apparently all he needed to shoot blood and black tore out all over the floor. As it hit the floor, glass shards rained down on him from above, creating more cuts and wounds in his flesh, and he reset after screaming his muffled, mouthless scream. The horrific image burned into my mind as I turned and slammed that door in as I searched my way out. Another door. As I slammed that door in a search of the way out, another door. Hopefully this was the one. The fourth door as I opened, the hellish nightmare seemed a little less disturbing as I walked in. The room was red, all red, walls, floor, ceiling. There was a black leather couch centered in the room. At first I didn't see anything else in the room, and was appreciated of this unexpected break from insanity. A moment to catch my breath, I thought, but just then a child emerged from behind the couch, or at least I thought it was a child at first. It began to crawl over me, and once it fully was in view, I realised it was merely the head of a child attached to the body. The mouth way too large as it smiled sharp, jagged shark-like teeth, its lips literally just stretched from ear to ear, the arms and legs just been animalistically ripped from its body and replaced from some form of the rusted steel makeshift robotics. It moved awkwardly across the floor, a few feet before realising an inhuman roar mixed with a child's scream. The sight caused me to vomit, as two more nearly identical creatures emerged from the floor behind the couch. They screamed at each other and began violently tearing each other apart. As I fell back, scrambling to get out of that room before they turned to me for the next meal, I slammed the door behind me, and I thought I might never find my way back. I could be lost in this hellish hallway forever. It had already been so long since I stepped over it and threshold of the steps and into this place. The fifth door opened in the doorway, and I don't even know how to describe it. I stepped in, walking right into the strands of flesh, stretched to and from various points in the room. It was a spiderweb mess of blood-soaked entrails and venom-pungent smells. I heard the first and only words in that room. It started as a low rumble but escalated to vibrate everything, including the air in my lungs as it spoke. "You cannot ignore me." Those four words rang out through my torrent of screams as it stepped into view. A giant spider-like creature composed a torn-bodied part, both human and animal, and held together with the blood and rotted seas. Mismatched legs tripped with the steel, screaming heads of skulls. Prominent towards me, its torso more human than the rest of its smell, to be all one piece, yet was inhumanly large. It was an alien in a shape, probably because it appeared to be multiple skulls from different animals mashed together. What looked like deer antlers covered in flesh made upon mandibles hung below the oversized gaping hole I assumed was its mouth. The different animal heads mashed together, giving the creature four eyes all piercing and so black I could feel it pulling a part of my soul as it stared into me. It stopped before reaching me and leaned itself down towards me. The smell of the rotten flesh used to create such an entity was so foul I had to fight to make myself breathe as it leaned closer to the air around me, began to rumble again as it did when it first spoke. "I am always watching." The vibrations of its words shook me to my knees. It was so loud I felt as though my eardrums would burst. The creature turned from me and walked back into a web of flesh, and I got to my feet and ran back through the door as I stepped through the air shock. "Always watching." The creature's final two words as I slammed the door behind me and echoed into my head. As I stood there was the other side of the door. I noticed the hallway had ended, and there was a familiar door at the end just a short distance from the hall. I ran for it, hoping that it would lead me back to my home, and at this nightmare. I finally found the door and ran through it, screaming and tripping to the steps, falling into the whimpering dogs who were waiting there for my return. I was out. I was back into my house, back into my stairway. My wife came running down the stairway, pleading me to tell her what happened, but I had no words. I couldn't bring myself to describe to her what I had just seen, or where I had been, or what seemed like hours, when it apparently just been a few minutes. The dogs had stopped before the bottom of the steps that night, warning me to go no further, and I ignored their warning. We moved from that house shortly after. In fact, we moved completely to a different state. I never was able to forget what happened that night, But I like our new house. It's cozy and quiet. We've been here for almost a year now with no problems, but last night the dogs woke up barking at 3 AM. This time when the dogs stopped scared before going through a door, I listened. So yeah, that was Listen to the Dogs by Cryptic Nightmares. I hope you did enjoy. If you've got any other creepypastas you want me to narrate, please do let me know, but that is it for now. Thank you very much for watching. Good night everyone.